My name is Glenn Jones. I am a principal game designer for Marvel Snap.
Hi, I am Kent Eric Hagman. I'm the Associate Design Director on Marvel Snap.
You guys had a big Summer Game Fest reveal, and it was Conquest Mode. I know before Marvel Snap went 1.0, the team had wanted to do a competitive game mode like this, and it didn't quite pan out. How are you able to iterate on it in such a way that players can feel a little more excited about it?
We early on in some builds, we had a mode that we called tournaments that would eventually become Conquest, which was this same style of, hey, let's play battle mode, let's play multiple matches, try to go on a run and rack up a bunch of wins. And while working on it and developing Snap, and then we released Snap, and we are seeing how players engage with the game, we totally went through a bunch of play tests to try to figure out, okay, where's the right tuning? In fact, Glenn here was awesome. He wrote us a great novel of feedback that was super valuable to help us we think we are missing the mark totally on this, and this, and made a lot of adjustments to try to land somewhere that we think the players will like. We've also tried very hard to structure Conquest in a way that if the player feedback goes in one direction or not, we can change it since it's a seasonal piece of content. Every season we'll have a new medal shop, and if we think that it would be more fun for players to have slightly different offerings in the medal shop next season, we can change that. If we think the number of wins aren't the quite right amount, we can change that too. And so the idea is that this can be flexible based on how players handle it or kind of receive this feature.
I think Conquest is a lot of fun. I'm newer to the company, so they were a lot of the way done with battle mode as a premise when I got here, but it was one of the early things I saw, and I was like, this is fun. And then, we started working on Conquest, and I was like, this is also fun, and there were ways we could improve it and make it more fun.
Yeah, actually, I have some fun stories about battle mode, but I don't know if you guys had different questions, so I could either tell those or
go for it. We
okay, great,
sure.
yeah.
So you're welcome.
No, when I joined, actually, I think it was on day one. I joined. Ben Brode is walking me through things, and literally, it's early days of COVID. It was should we even be in person? Probably not. We'll just be in person one day and then go work from home. And he shows me something. He's now I've got something else to show you, and it's called battle mode, and I think it might be the most fun way to play the game. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. There's another new thing for me to learn, right? Back in 2020, and I played it. I was like, oh yeah, this is super fun, right? You kind of learn your opponent's deck. There starts to become a lot of mind games. When should I snap? When should I retreat? We went through so many iterations though of how much health should you have. There were early versions where you could continually snap the cube. I mean, the cube would get up to thousands of health or damage. I think the first version he showed me that each player had 500 health, and then there was a separate rule where if you won 3 in a row, it would get you would also win. It was an alternate win condition, so people wouldn't just retreat on turn 1 all the time. Yeah, it was a little bit messy, but that's part of where you start in game design. You throw a lot at the board, you start play testing, you see what sticks, you trim down until we finally got to the mode that is now live to our players of 10 health apiece, and then starting at round 5, it's 2 health at stake.
So speaking of Conquest mode, I'm curious if you guys anticipate any specific cards or decks to maybe even develop their own meta in Conquest mode, right? I'm sure you great grasp on what performs better and what doesn't on the ladder, but do you think you'll ever get to a place where certain decks are far more viable in Conquest mode and maybe they aren't on the regular ladder or vice versa?
Certainly early when we introduced battle mode, cards that gave you a lot of information earlier in the battle, people prioritized stuff like Daredevil and even Yondu or Cable were cards that people talked about as this is a powerful thing to have because it really informs your snapping and you don't have to see as many cards played each game. I think that we might see some of that being a little bit stronger. One of the things I'm curious about, don't really know how it's going to fall, is there's kind of this balancing point of where you kind of want to be able to handle anything, right? Because if you're playing a deck that's very linear, you might run into a card that's really strong against you. Examples might be obviously Galactus has a lot of counter cards. You could run into something there. Patriot, you could run into someone who's playing, a lot of Enchantress effects, that kind of thing. But the more mid-rangey decks that can beat anything kind of, but aren't super strong anywhere, not being super strong anywhere is also kind of a loss. How many times are you going to try and win a 55% coin flip, to try and get your way through the infinite tournament? So there's a real kind of give and take there. Is do you want to try and get 5 strong matchups in a row, or do you just want to try and win those coin flips in a row? And I think that's seeing how that manifests in the game is something I'm excited about.
I've been among the Marvel Snap players who wraps up their weekly missions by the end of Friday, and I feel like there isn't a lot to do on Saturday and Sunday, so I'm thrilled to see that weekend missions have now become a thing. What can players expect to see from those?
Well, it's exactly addressing the thing that you're talking about, right? You get to the weekend, you're playing a ton of Snap, and you've run out of missions, right? You've exhausted your season pass missions, and you want something more. And so, for this first batch of missions, we're trying a lot of interactions with the new cards to see how players, if they're excited about, getting to use the new cards that just came out, and see how that feels. But again, kind of similar to what I mentioned with Conquest Mode, this is something we plan to iterate on, and as we get player feedback and see what really shapes up to be best. I know, Glenn, did you want to add on anything?
Yeah, I mean, just from a design standpoint, I think it's kind of got a nicely symbiotic relationship between the locations that we feature on the weekends and new cards. And like now when we can, kind of release cards that might have synergy with the newer cards and have kind of a nice little tightly wrapped game experience coming along, such as we've already previewed like the Great Web as a location, and this is like a really move oriented season, so like these new cards that are all about moving, and the location comes out to move, and like your weekend missions, you get to play with your new cards. It just kind of all adds up to, you get to experience the season almost as kind of a narrative experience, not just the traditional Snap experience.
Your team is always very transparent when it comes to like the balance changes in your patch notes. This card was winning too much, people were using this card too much. Can you talk about like what goes into that research and that data, because it's data you have access to, no one else has access to? Like, when do you recognize a card is either underplayed or overplayed in that process of balance?
Well, first off, I want to give a shout out to Glenn, who's the driving force behind a lot of this. I don't know if you guys know this, like he is going above and beyond the Call of Duty to like provide all this for y'all, and so it warms my heart to hear that you guys are loving it too. But I just want to make sure he got his recognition for it.
Thanks, boss. The game, I am in the data all the time. It's not like I check in basically every single day to see kind of how things are going. And I obviously, we have, weekly dashboards that kind of sum things up. So I use a combination of those because, especially once we were introduced the over-the-air changes, OTAs, that led us to have some times where a week metagame might have a different metagame in the first half of the week than the second half of the week. So the daily looks kind of really help me see what's exactly going on, how matchup percentages are changing. And so I've got my head in the data pretty constantly and writing down ideas and ways we can shift cards around. And one of our approaches is we're a little bit more fluid than the traditional card game model, I think. A lot of those games are very much premised on you release your card and that your card does what it says it does, and that makes a lot of sense in a paper world. And it makes some sense in a digital world too, because you want some amount of stability in the game, and things changing a lot is tricky. But one of the upsides of Snap's small deck size is there aren't that many cards in your deck, so a small change to one card is a much larger percentage of your game. You can see it and figure it out really quickly. And we're kind of taking that approach of we're a live service game. We're going to treat our cards like they're live service game objects. Like League of Legends constantly debuffs a weapon by 5-10% or whatever. Why can't we do that with our cards? We can treat our card collection the same way. So we have a variety of thresholds that we look at, both for individual cards and decks, and very often the performance of cards within those decks. And I just kind of keep track of, how are things crossing thresholds? How often do they do it? What are the metagame forces that kind of cause these things to happen? And we don't take really quick action in a lot of those cases. Sometimes we've, in hindsight, maybe wish that we did, but I think it's a healthier approach in general to give people some time to sort it out, to look at what's going on for themselves and try and discover how they can affect the metagame versus, keep the target moving at all times. It's nice to have it settle in one spot, everybody gets a shot at the goal, and then we can move it away again and the chase is on.
Kent, anything to add to that?
No. Not even gonna try. Glenn did a really good comprehensive job there.
I know you guys recently implemented the flexible card series drops, which is a bit of a change from how it worked for the first few months post-launch. I'm curious where you guys have a new goal in mind just for your card acquisition economy overall, because I know right now a lot of players hoard tokens because they're well, I don't know if this card I want's going to drop or not. It's a whole mind game of itself, right? Trying to do the math, and people have spreadsheets of okay, this card's been out for this long, it should drop by June. Do you have like any changes to that process coming up, or are you guys kind of happy where your token system and all that is right now, as far as card acquisition is concerned?
I think we have some improvements we can make for sure. Like, I think the scenario you just described, like I get a bunch of tokens and then I agonize, should I buy this card? Will I regret it? Like buyer's remorse is a real thing. And I don't think that that's necessarily the most fun Snap experience. And so we do have some things. I don't think I can announce them yet. That will come soon.
Sure you can. You can do it right now.
But just stay tuned. We think that there was a lot of fun in Marvel Snap, especially when you're starting out and you just hey, I play games, I upgrade cards, I get new cards. This is super fun. Like we kind of want to try to recapture some of that magic. So just stay tuned. I think we can do something better.
Yeah. To kind of just jump a little bit on that, like the core fun of Snap, there's so many things to it, but like the early Snap experience was what really grabbed me with the game. Like logging in, doing your dailies, like getting a new card, being very excited about it. And the token shop's really not the same kind of vibe. Like it's a very different game vibe once you get there. And the metaphor I've used is it's like Christmas is really fun, but going to Target's not very fun, right? But like they're the same. Like they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Like you get all of your Christmas. Like so. Yeah. How can we make sure that Snap feels a lot more like Christmas? And that's my hope for the future.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk about, you guys have a lot of cards. I mean, you introduce a new card in the ecosystem, it can have really fun, interesting effects on the whole meta. But do you guys have any fun stories about releasing a card that you've play tested internally, then watched players just do something completely off the wall that you never expected, that you had to rapidly change or fix in the future?
Maybe some of the cards that preceded me, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm trying to think some of the earlier days of Snap, we had some of that going on. Like when we shipped, we didn't think Nova getting +2 when he died would completely dominate the meta, and then there we were, and we hadn't stood up our OTA technology yet. We were like trying to get a client patch out and we couldn't, and then I was like, okay, well, we're in a Nova meta, and plus most of our players were like kind of in that like early Series 1, Series 2 section, and so I was like, yeah, you're gonna see Nova, and good thing armor was there. Man, if there wasn't armor, it would have been even worse. But yeah, there's I'm trying to think of some more fun ones that were a little out there from what we expected.
I think like Titania maybe is a good example of a card that just had like a much wider range of play than maybe we expected. The design of that card predated me, but coming in, like I just thought it was a sweet card and I enjoyed playing with it, and then we kind of gradually saw it take up a little bit of a role player slot in a lot of different decks for being a really efficient way to mess with Galactus, to just play a lot of power on the cheap. And it was just a cool card. I thought that was it wound up being a lot more interesting, and I'm kind of hoping for a very similar reception to Silk, which looks like a move card, but I think it's got a little bit more going on than that.
Silk is super cool. I love Silk. She doesn't necessarily, you don't read her and go, wow, this card's awesome, but then you start playing with her and you're like, oh, this card's awesome. I was gonna say, Titania reminded me of She-Hulk, kind of surprised me a little bit. We play test her internally, and it kind of just felt like this like inverse Sunspot in some ways. But then I was like, oh, I've been playing this card wrong the entire time. You're supposed to play it with Taskmaster, or you're supposed to play it with Shuri. Wow, I feel dumb for not like picking up on that during the internal play tests. But that one definitely surprised me a little bit.
I think it's
Probably
a
not Glenn,
lot of fun.
He's on top of it.
I think it's a lot of fun how you guys tie in a lot of your seasons to like whatever's new just in the Marvel universe. Obviously, we're doing the Spider-Verse this season, as Across the Spider-Verse is doing crazy numbers in theaters, but then there's always those like off months where there's not really much going on in the Marvel universe, and you can do something just like the Savage Lands or whatever you conjure up over there. I'm just curious what the decision-making process is like then, when you do kind of have free reign as far as seasonal content. Do you have cards that you're like, well, we want these cards coming, they fit into this season, or is it the other way around? We want to do this theme, and these are the cards that should come along with it?
There are a few cards like still in the hopper, so to speak, from the old days that we look and see, or can we squeeze this character
War
in?
Machine.
We've got like art or designs for it. Yeah, War Machine's on that list.
Poor guy.
It's coming to Disney Plus very soon. No.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a few of those, although obviously like as time goes on, like the bench, so to speak, it's a little less crowded. So we're a lot more focused on what would be cool, like what are things that we know people are excited about that we can kind of set up to promise for the future that maybe doesn't necessarily need to tie into a media property, but we want it to tie into whatever kind of core Marvel excitement there is. So there are a lot of really exciting characters in Marvel that we haven't touched on. So there's some obviously like there's a lot to do with the X-Men. Like even the actual like movies have only really touched the surface of the X-Men in so many ways, and so we're really excited to dive further in there ourselves. So many great characters like the Hellfire Club and the Phoenix Force and things like that are just really exciting space that I love. And that's a lot of it is really just we're all Marvel fans, a lot of us, and we have some little groups, and we could come together and brainstorm like how could we, if we had this like kind of top line idea for a season, how would we execute it? What characters would we include that would make it exciting? What are the creative treatments that we could utilize to kind of tie them together? Is there a story? Because like sometimes you can really create something from almost nothing in that regard, and try and feel like a real experience, like you're going through chapters with the new cards as they come out, and that's always really exciting.
Now, we talked to your team last year a little bit about like card design. I want to know if that like kind of emphasis has changed at all. Do you guys start with like an idea of a mechanic and then kind of apply that to a character? Do you start with a character first? Like talk about like how you currently are designing new cards, the process, and how that goes.
Yeah, we do a mix of those things. I've in fact run like we call them design jams, and Kenteric ran them before me, and I've mostly just adopted the techniques that he used. But we'll start with like, hey, we've got like these 5 to 10, maybe 15 characters. Like just throw designs up that you think are cool for these characters, and then we'll have a week where it's like, hey, let's just design cards, no names, just come up with something that you think is cool. Like you hate losing to move, like design a card that you think would be fun to play against move that doesn't just say stop moving. Like that kind of stuff is pretty fun, and you get some really interesting designs from both sides, and then we try and kind of make sure we're always looking for a spot where we can marry the creative and the mechanical stuff in an interesting way.
Like for me, that's Wave. Whenever I see Wave played, I like give a deep sigh, and then like I just wait till the next card is played. Do you guys have a card that you like when you're playing publicly or in beta testing that you go, oh, okay, I mean, let's see what happens next turn? Like, what's that card that gives you dread the following turn?
I don't. I'm just a really easygoing card player.
I know. I'm starting to
go
think
through all the
like
cards that he can't talk about. He's trying to think what's in. Because we live in two different worlds: the dev world and the public world.
Well, I mean, in the dev world, I mostly get excited. Like when someone plays something that looks really powerful or exciting against me in a playtest. It's like I'm not even paying as much attention to the game. Like I'm paying attention to our Zoom chat and seeing like what's their reaction. Like, are they enjoying playing the card against me? Is it because that's going to matter a lot more to how it feels for me specifically as someone who likely had a hand in creating cards.
I was about to say, why is that card Shuri? Because you've adjusted Shuri to the point that now you know where the big card is going to hit, but if you don't have a direct counter to it, there's nothing you can do but just watch it happen. So Greg got into the topic of card design, and I want to go back to the topic of this season for Spider-Verses. I know that there are a lot of exciting cards that are coming this season. Silk is a really cool one for this week, and we're still going to see Spider-Man 2099 and Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham's effect is something that looks really cool, and it's also something where I said to myself, there's no way they nailed this in one. There had to be some ideas that were thrown out there that didn't quite make the cutting room floor. So what were some of those initial design ideas for some of these cards that didn't quite make it?
Well,
let's see how good
a lot of them
memory
I think
is.
will still make, so it's a little tricky.
Yeah.
But like a core source of inspiration for me early on was I really liked the hammer and hammer space. Like it's a really good gag in the comics, it's a really good gag in the movie, and like this idea of like making somebody smaller via hitting them with a hammer just has like such a Looney Tunes vibe to it. That was design space I was pretty excited to try and pursue. And we tried a variety of things. This design in particular I know originated with our game designer Jason Yang, who started us off with a card that pigified or squirrelified, actually I should say, a card just because he thought the squirrel was cute and funny, and we were like, well, yeah, but there's no like creative connection to a squirrel. So we talked to Johnny Erner, do we have time to get another art piece in for the season? He was like, yep. And we're like, great, we're gonna turn him into a pig. And like that's the actual sort of the lore of Spider-Ham, is he's actually a spider who was bitten by a radioactive pig, turning him into an anthropomorphized pig. So like that's what he now passes on, which is less narratively sound, but very cute and funny. So yeah, we just thought it was really adorable, and it started off. We tried a variety of different ways that people could get picked, like from specific card costs or the top card of the deck or a random card in hand, yada yada. And we wound up just landing on this one.
What's been the most requested card that you haven't that like from your community that you keep seeing over and over and over again? You don't have to confirm you're working on it. I'm just curious about like what people are hitting their hands for on the table for their next mutant, next Avenger, whatever.
I feel like it's like certain variants. When is this variant coming out? I want this variant. I need this variant.
Where's old man Wolverine, right? Where's Ultimate Nightcrawler? Those kind of things, right?
It's hard. There's so many, so it's hard to think about somebody who like stands truly kind of atop the mountain, so to speak. But yeah, I think Loki is one that I see a lot about. It's a character that's really exciting. The MCU has done a really excellent job of taking a character that I actually didn't, in many cases with MCU characters, like not one of my favorite comic characters, and turning him into, really a really awesome one. And the portrayal's fantastic. Like I have a picture of my wife and myself with Tom Hiddleston somewhere around here because it's just a character we both enjoyed that much.
It's got to be the fun thing about working in that universe, right? Because you guys could design 50 new cards tomorrow. There's still be 100 more fan favorite characters that people are like, when's this guy coming though? So it's almost like although there is a finite number of Marvel characters, it's almost like an endless well of content to play with there. I'm curious about the process of kind of developing this game simultaneously for mobile and PC. Obviously, there are games multi-platform all over the place. But Marvel Snap is kind of one-to-one in its PC and mobile port, other than small changes there. I'm just curious what that's like from the dev side. What unique challenges that creates for you guys when it comes to patchwork, maybe UI design, things of that nature.
Yeah, so far, I mean, Marvel Snap was designed as a mobile-first game, but not necessarily like mobile exclusive game. And so you definitely prioritize making sure it felt good, on these little tiny devices that consume hours and hours of our days, right? And making sure, from like trying to like make sure most of the inputs were on the bottom third, so you didn't have to like lift your thumb up unless it was something deliberate like snapping, right? So we really kind of focused in on the mobile experience, and then with PC, the first step was, well, can we just get it to run on PC? To like, okay, now that we've got it up and running, is there more we can do here? And so I don't have a lot I can share right now about that, other than to say, I think we could do a better PC client. And so just stay tuned for that one as well.
As a bit of a follow-up, I noticed that PC controller support was something on the development roadmap. Is that an effort to make Marvel Snap playable on something like Steam Deck, or even like a potential trial balloon to eventually bring it to consoles?
I think as, hardcore passionate gamers ourselves, we play games in a variety of ways. And so I think it's more of just like from the inquisitive minds of the to speak frankly, the wizards who work here, when they're like working on our PC, they're like, well, while I was plumbing the depths of these catacombs of code, wouldn't it be cool if like I could just look at that? It's kind of working, right? And so it's honestly more of just like you can do that. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Let's do that. Let's pursue that a little bit more. So I'd say kind of stems more from that originally.
I was just going to say, like, we have a lot of peers in the game industry who have been working on accessibility through controller support for a long time in a lot of categories, and being able to, offer something that links into that ourselves is also really awesome. Can bring our game to a whole new audience.
So I know that we play kind of in like a space map on an asteroid. Do you guys have any plans for like alternative maps, premium maps in the background, like New York City you could play as, maybe the X Mansion, stuff like that?
Yeah, we've talked about doing different boards or maps or whatever you want to call them.
Boards, I guess I'd call it, right? Boards, yeah.
Sure. We don't have anything final or anything I can like tease or announce or say is cool about that, other than to say like, yep, we recognize they're just the one right now. And we were very deliberate with like the color tones and hues and like contrast and noise, because with any piece of background or in any video game, you kind of want it to like be there and set the ambience and the tone, but it's there to like create that canvas that your characters can really pop off of that. So that was something that was very deliberate about like, hey, what how dark is the asteroid? Like what kind of a lighting do we have there to make sure that like the characters, they're the stars of the show, right? We don't. You don't go to a play to like see the props. Like the props are awesome. Yeah, they help set the stage, but like you're there to see the raw human emotion, right? And so in the same way, like we're here to see Cyclops now, thanks to high evolutionary like laser fools with his I-beam, right? And so we want to make sure that pops off the board. So,
Yeah,
anyways, all I have to
by
say,
design. No, it's by design. You're totally right. Like, it's not just something you just slap on a background and call it a day, right? There's actually, it takes months of design and tweaking to make sure that it looks right and everybody can see things clearly. Yeah, it's a process for sure.
Yeah. And so when we're in tinkering that space, of course, we're an ultra creative team here, and like the artists were like, well, if we did another board, I had to like, a lot of the discussions were made about that, which is something that would be really cool.
So,
it is time.
Go ahead, Ozzy.
It is time to address the devourer of planet-sized elephant in the room. So we're recording this just hours after you guys announced the latest round of balance changes, and of course the biggest one is to Galactus. I'm sure that my friends here have their own questions on this change, but for me, what stood out about this to me is that I imagine that it must be really difficult to balance a card like this while still making him feel like Galactus. And you've gone through this a couple of times already with the leader, because you've made a few changes to him as well. So my question is, how do you approach balance changes for cards like that, where there should be an adjustment, there should be a change, but you also don't want to kill the spirit or the identity of what that card is?
Yeah, we obviously, when we make balance changes, they're often a nerf or a buff. Like, we have a goal in mind for what the outcome is, whether it's positive or negative. However, I definitely don't enter into like balance approaches looking like, how can we like kill this card? How can we make people stop playing it? Yada yada. Like, no, we want to make sure it has a home. Like we designed it. It has a creative concept. The fact that it is seeing a lot of play in many cases often means that people love it. There's something beloved about it that they want to be able to engage with. So yeah, like, we're never trying to take that away. And I think leader was very early on when I got here, and that card was just being problematic, and it's an awkward kind of card because it's not a card you really traditionally want to have be one of your strongest cards, since it can invalidate a lot of different tactical approaches. Like, how is another 6 cost going to be good if leader's the best 6 cost, right? Like, you just could have more leader's power plus whatever. So that's a really tricky spot. So that's always the case, is that we're looking for how can we keep either the core idea that people really love, or find the card like a slightly better home. Like Zabu's another good example of that, where the Zabu decks of today look super different from the Zabu decks of yore, but they're still very strong. Like, they have a good identity. They're still about 4-cost cards, in many cases some of the same 4-cost cards. So for Galactus, all of that, we learned a lot over the last few months about both how to balance. We've improved our own processes for how to gather data, evaluate it, test our cards, all of that. And so yeah, we've been cooking on Galactus actually for a while. I think we've kind of in and out for months now been, like, hey, anyone got like an idea for a change to Galactus? Let's just throw it on playtest and try and get some reps with it. And this is not, the first one we tried, for sure. We even tried some pretty radical redesigns relative to what we wound up shipping, because we wanted to at least consider it. We're aware that the card could be problematic, and we didn't want to be caught in a spot where we're like, we need to change the card and we don't have a change that we feel good about making. So that's, we landed here. This is a change that we like. The biggest issue with Galactus before was that the card just didn't really have a lot you could change about it. So we needed to kind of add a way to make one of its card values matter. Like, you could change its cost, but like, you can't really go higher than 6. And I mean, we did legitimately consider 7, and played with 7, just as like, of all the characters in the Marvel Universe, Galactus being the first true 7 cost, like, is a reasonable criteria for that, I think. But yeah, it wasn't solving the problems, which were that people just actually were having less fun winning even against Galactus. Like, that's the real problem. I had a game design professor who always said, when paper complains about rock, like, that's a problem. And so that was very much the case here, where even beating Galactus was kind of an issue. So we needed to introduce a way that players could interact with Galactus while also doing what they had come to do, which is play, snap, have their core fun, have their deck work the way they want it to. So that was why we pursued this specific balance change. And it essentially just gives us a dial we can turn on Galactus via his power to make him stronger or weaker, and hopefully find that healthy spot where he can be satisfying for the people who are fans of him, but still very answerable for all of the other players.
I'm always fascinated by how card updates not only affect that card, but the decks that they're played in, right? Like, in the same patch today, you guys changed Dazzler. Obviously, her text box overhaul is a pretty big deal, but the fact that she's now a 3-cost card suddenly like opens the door for her to be like a key player in Surfer decks, which is like a whole thing now that people are going to experiment and tool with. I'm just curious about like how you guys approach that, and I guess it really just speaks to how many moving parts there are in a game like this, where even when you're adjusting a single card, whether it be to nerf it or buff it, there's potentially dozens of other cards to consider the impact on them when doing that.
I think particularly with certain costs and power values, we have to be mindful of Kazar, Killmonger, kind of Electra, not as much. Zabu, Silver Surfer, Cerebro 2, Cerebro 3, Cerebro 4, Cerebro 5, all the different Cerebros, right? They don't see as much play, but it is interesting. Yeah, we have to constantly consider all of these, like, well, how will this shake out and play? And as I don't have, Glenn's going to give you a much better answer though.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of it. As designers, I've kind of been focused a little bit on what are the trends that are happening in the metagame and seeing like, what are spots that we might be not realizing what are blind spots for us. Like, we haven't made a lot of new 6 costs lately, for example. It's like, okay, well, that's like, something we should keep an eye on. Is that because they're hard to design? Is that because they're not like strong? Like what's pulling us away from those designs? And similarly, we've been making a lot of 4 costs. Why are we doing that? And I think that's something that is in some ways like I have like a fairly long series of theories about how the metagame eventually got to where it was, but in a lot of ways, like 4 costs kind of became this really competitive spot where everyone was fighting over what's going to happen going into turn 5 to set up for turn 6. And Dazzler's a great example because it's like Dazzler was a 4 cost and wasn't seeing much play, and that was in part because the effect was weak. But even if we had just rated her for a 4 cost effect, all we've really done is thrown one more competitor into the ring on these decks that are caring a lot about turn 4. And so it's like, okay, well, what cost could we give her to move that dial and make her more interesting? And we already have a lot of similar cards around 2 with like Angela and Mysterio. So 3 seemed like a good home for her to be, potentially a support card in these decks that go really wide, potentially a support card in Silver Surfer decks that stop playing Killmonger, like that kind of thing was really interesting to us. And that's where we wound up settling. And that's something I think we will continue to experiment and explore with. And I wouldn't be surprised, like I've kind of been chatting internally. I'm like, I wonder if our 4 costs are just like slightly too strong. Like Darkhawk has had kind of this like rolling effect where he's very strong, so like other 4 costs need to be a little stronger than they used to be, I think. And maybe one day.
Is there a certain cat that's causing all of this to happen?
I thought for sure like the Galactus nerf was going to be like he has to be played where Silver Surfer is, because I thought that made sense, right? He scouts and he gets wiped out. The change is good. I like the change. Happy with it. Hated fighting it in the Galactus. My question for you is, as you guys are still relatively new in the card game space, as your card libraries continue to grow and evolve and you add more and more and more cards, will we start seeing kind of like, I'm not going to say other card games on this interview, but we have certainly like modern, standard, extended stuff like that in your ecosystem.
Set rotation.
As your stuff gets bigger and bigger.
Well, I don't know, Glenn. Do you have more well-formed thoughts on this?
It's something I think is interesting, especially from a game modes perspective. Like there are a lot of little dials we can change on the game to kind of make it feel like it's totally different. I mean, what if you were playing Snap and there were only 8 locations and you knew what all 8 of them were going to be, right? Like that's a totally different version of the game. So I think there's room for us to experiment with that, but we don't have anything like really concrete that we're planning to move on. I think Conquest is going to teach us a lot about what players are looking for from a new game mode and a new experience within the game, and we'll use that to develop whatever we do next.
I guess I do have one more question, and it is on the subject of Conquest. Is this sort of your testing ground into maybe potentially getting into competitive esports for Marvel Snap?
I'd say Battle a Friend in many ways was, first of all, just allowing a competitive outlet. Without Battle a Friend and battle mode, like, well, A, like you just couldn't go head to head against somebody, and B, heads up Snap doesn't make a ton of sense where it's like, you beat me, but you only took 1 cube because I had to retreat because whatever random thing happened. So let's play again, I guess. Okay, great. So how many cubes are we playing for? Right. It's like, when do we just call it a day or whatnot? And so that's kind of why we wanted battle mode out there. It gives you a way to like, hey, we got 2 players, you and your buddy or whatever, you're talking it up and you're like, all right, let's see who's the best, right? And so that's kind of what battle mode allows to happen. And it was really exciting to see all the esports tournaments that did pop up as a result of Battlefront. And so I think what Conquest is really doing for us is allowing for that more deep strategic mode. For if you're a really hardcore strategy gamer and you just want to sink your teeth into like agonizing, rack your brain kind of like, oh, I know they have this in their deck, there's a 33% chance they drew it, they didn't play it, and if they go left I go right, but I know I have that kind of mental work is what I love about Conquest. It really like gets in there, especially earlier you asked about designing for mobile and PC. Like Conquest is definitely a mode that I think more favors someone who's playing at a PC, because it is, you can't just bust out a Conquest round while you're in line at your favorite coffee shop. You're going to get too distracted and go, wait a minute, I forgot what they have in their deck. Or just like, oh, I need to concede out because I got my coffee faster than I thought I would. And, Conquest is much more like, all right, I'm going to sit down. I've got 20 minutes. Like, let's do this, right? And so, anyway, there's not necessarily like a platform for esports, but it is more of like a, hey, there's people out there who are playing Snap who love strategy games and want to sink their teeth into more. Let's provide them this hungry outlet to be able to do that.
The one thing that I really am interested about the game is when I'm in a really intense battle and it looks like I'm going to lose, but I'm still really interested to see how the game ends, and I don't want to lose 4 cubes. Have you guys figured out a way to try to, maybe let escape, but like watch the turn play off to see what the other person was going to do without losing 4 cubes? I've had that problem like 10 times a night. I'm like, I really want to see it, but I don't want to lose 4 cubes.
You gotta pay cubes, Greg.
No, you gotta pay to play. You gotta pay. Oh, you want to see the flop? You want to see a flop? You better.
No.
Yeah, I know from the winning side, sometimes you've got this epic combo and your opponent retreats, and it reminds me of like playing RTSs back in the day where it's like your opponent retreated right as like your massive army rolled up to your base, and the window would pop up, was like, keep playing, like your opponent left, keep playing or quit.
Yeah, right.
And, only 1 times out of 20 would I like, yeah, keep playing. I just want to like watch the destruction burn. I built all those massive units or whatever. But yeah, no, I totally feel you on the winning. On the losing side, like, hey, as part of Snap, right? Did your opponent have the cards?
King is something I run into sometimes where like I'll snap, he snaps, he plays king, goes back to 1 snap and leaves. And I'm like, damn it. At least I got to see how the turn got out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. King's super interesting in battle mode, because if in Conquest, like if they have king, like it's turn 6, they didn't play king yet. It's like, well, are they fishing for king? But then he can totally bluff you and like, well, I'm not going to play anything because they're just going to play king. And then they don't play king and you're like, right? Or you play white queen and you pull king, so they have king in hand. They know you have king in hand, so they think you're going to play it. And then, yeah, there's all kinds of wacky shenanigans that can happen.
That is such an interesting thing you know about king, because that's such an outside the box kind of like card design. Like, are there any card designs that have been floated around that you have just been kind of blown away at how they're sort of different from the standard card game?
I mean, when I joined and was shown Agatha, who at the time I think was on Adam Warlock, I was just like, wait, what does this do? And I was like, what do you think it does? Well, he was a 6'12", 6'11" at the time. He was literally Agatha. It was just on Adam Warlock instead. And we're like, wait, this can't be real, right? And then I made a deck with it. I'm like, oh, okay, so you want to try to do this with Adam Warlock, right? Okay, yeah. So, yeah, that one really blew my mind when I joined. I don't know, Glenn, is there any that exploded your head when you?
Yeah, I think Agatha's like a really good example. I think like Thanos and High Evolutionary are others that feel really cool, and like they're utilizing the digital space in interesting ways. Galactus is obviously like really kind of paradigm breaking for Snap specifically, but maybe not that weird in a card game or like other card games where things blow up all the time. Like in our card game, it's a lot more rare. So yeah, locations for me, I think that was the actual design space I was most interested about from
me too.
As a designer, like coming into Snap, because I've been designing cards for a long time. Those are easy. Like locations are way more interesting, and that a piece of the game and being able to kind of find new stuff to do there was really exciting to me. So I hope players really enjoy all of the locations we've got continuing to come out this year.
Yeah, actually, also similar to Glenn, like when seeing Marvel Snap and joining Second Dinner, the location system was what got me really, really, really excited. You know, like as a gamer who is also a game designer, I'm, you know, like personally like invested in like what's the infinite problem like generator, right? You know, to generate me infinite problems I have to solve, because that's like what fun is. And I saw the location system, like, oh, this is it, right? No two games of Snap are ever the same, right? You know, especially like even the ordering, like if Central Park flips first and then Space Throne, that's super different than if Space Throne flips first and then Central Park, right? Like it totally like it messes with you and what you're planning to do. And so yeah, the location system like exploding head kind of when I saw it.
Then there are just those games where you do the 1 in 100 roll and you end up with either Ego or a World Chip, and it's just like, well, you just have to snap, because how often does that happen?
Yes, it's Ego is one of those like you either love them or maybe not so much locations.
But it
Do you
doesn't
always
happen
snap on turn
It doesn't
one
happen
with
often
Ego?
enough where it gets annoying, though.
Yeah, I think you and that took us a while to find, actually. Like what was the right frequency of Ego appearing? There was a for one of our like internal tests, I was setting up the location, a different location system back in the day, that different than from like our featured and hot location system. And I set up some like, you know, placeholder data that was set. It was set before our, you know, playtest would ever run. And so like I just needed data in there just so the code would like compile or whatever. And so I'm like, oh yeah, the locations you'll see every day, you know, on this day is Ego, because like no one, like whatever, we're not running the playtest that day, it doesn't matter. I just needed something. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, like that stuck around, or like we moved our playtest date or something, and we started a playtest, and suddenly I just started getting bombarded with messages in Slack like, wait, Ego's the hot location? And like I'm like, this is kind of funny. I log in, I'm like, no, this is not funny. This just sucks.
I wanted to play the game. You're not letting me play the game.
He's totally fine if it's like 1 in 1,000 games or, you know, whatever the odds are right now. But like, yeah, every other game. And so everyone was like, oh, April Fools, we should do Ego. And I was the person like, no, there will be no Ego April Fools. No, thank you. There are some better locations we could do. I think actually Jason Yang, who Glenn mentioned earlier, was he the one that pitched Bar with No Name, or was that you, Glenn?
I think it was Jason.
Yeah, which actually turned out to be like a really fun hot location. I think at least from my limited view of, you know, what people were saying online, like a lot of people were having fun with Bar with No Name. Like, oh, like it's actually fun shenanigans you can do here to like mess with your opponent or whatnot. And so that was a fun one to do.
That class of location is really interesting, like locations that are very exciting to have in the game in really small quantities, but we have this kind of traditional method of introducing locations to everyone that makes them highly frequent. So we're kind of looking, you know, in the future, like, you know, if we want to make an Ego or a Bar with No Name, how would we introduce it? Because featuring it is not the answer.
Yeah, there's certain locations like we want to add to the game, but we don't necessarily want it to appear in half of your games for a day. We just don't think that's a fun experience, but we'd like to add it. So we're exploring like, okay, how can we just add it in, and let everybody know it's in there, but you're just not going to see it in every game, because that wouldn't be fun.
What's the most drastic card that you originally had like ready to go, you know, in the game playtesting that you've had to change dramatically? You mentioned Adam Warlock was like a 6'11" at one point or something ridiculous.
Well, he was Agatha. It was Agatha.
Oh, Agatha. Okay, yeah.
Adam Warlock took over and played your cards for you.
What's like
and then WandaVision came out, and we were like, oh wait, it was Agatha all along. Like, it's actually Brad Krusko, one of our engineer and game designers, who came up with that.
So what's like the most card? What's the card you've seen change the most at like at conception and like finally at release that's changed the most that you can talk about?
Bizarre's changed a lot. Man, he had actually his design was on War Machine way back in the day, and then I can't even remember what he did. And then he was a 4-cost that had Apocalypse ability. Of like when you discard him, he would and actually they had like a vine swinging animation for his card, like whoop, would swing back into your hand. I think that got reworked into Shanna's VFX eventually. And then we realized, oh, actually this discard ability is like way better on a 6-cost, because then like you're previewing to your opponent. And then it was like, really, is Kazar this 6-cost is going to be doing it? And then meanwhile we had Apocalypse, who used to be what Destroyer is now. Destroyer. And then we were like trying to find a good design for Apocalypse that matched his like super villain kind of vibe. And we were like, oh wait, that can go to Kazar. And then we shuffled War Machine onto Kazar. it's funny. I was like, just moving cups around on the board to try to like line up fantasies with abilities. Anyway, sorry, that was a tangential story.
No, that's interesting. Glenn, any cards that since you've been there that have changed drastically from inception to final release?
I mean, so a lot of the cards that have released lately, we're only like just really starting into cards that like I had a really active hand in designing. Interestingly enough, I've been here almost 6 months, but I think like the first card I actually designed was in the Guardian season. But 2099 is one of the released cards that took a while to land. We went through a lot of different designs for him, and I wound up, I believe the one we landed on was one of my pitches, and I was really wary of it because, he's a hero that destroys people, and we're like, how's that feel? Like, it's a little scary. Does that really resonate with him? And then, no spoilers, but Across the Spider-Verse is really great. People should see it, and I think that our 2099 feels really great in the context.
I mean, we saw that trailer, and that helped us all feel a lot better about it. We're like,
yeah. I had to convince you, I think, to let me do 2099 as a character too, didn't I, Ken? Yeah.
You did. I was like, is that really a character? I mean,
that's interesting.
Oscar Isaac, though, so
that's interesting because I know you guys knew that the Spider-Verse season was coming up. But did you have no frame of reference for what was coming up in Across the Spider-Verse? Did they give you like a set, I guess, like a set of quick facts that go, these are the characters, and just see what you can do without showing you the movie? Or how did that go? Did you have to just go designing blind, essentially?
We don't get like a ton of detail, but we do talk with Marvel and get what we need to, and we can ask questions about stuff to help us make a more faithful work. But this is actually something coming from my previous work, where I did a lot of work with other IPs, finding like what's going to be front and center, and like make sure that's the thing that we're making front and center too. Like, how do we get that cross-marketing approach? And so that was part of what made me really excited about 2099. Was like, we know he's going to be in the movie. He's going to have a big part. He was in the previous movie. He's like this linking thing across Spider-Verses. So that made me really excited about doing him. And one of the reluctances that we have is we kind of haven't really settled as a game what our approach is to like characters that have the same name, which 2099 is not Peter Parker. He's not literal Spider-Man, but he is the Spider-Man of his time and universe. And as Spider-Verse's popularity has exploded, we've obviously seen that challenged in a lot of ways. Like, there's so many characters now who are Spider-Man or Spider-Woman. So we kind of
Spider people
have to, yeah, we do have to reconcile at some point. We don't really have an overarching rule. Like, we have the Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider variant, for example. That's a thing in our game. We have a Scarlet Spider-Man variant. That's not Peter Parker either. And at some point, maybe we'll have to come up with different rules for ourselves than we've used previously. But right now, our rule is pretty much like rule of cool, and we determined that 2099 was cool, and we should do him.
So I'll wrap this up here, but I know you guys just finished the Spider-Verse expansion. I'm pretty much an X-Men simp, and you mentioned the Hellfire Club. Is that something you guys want to do? I'd love to see Shaw, Pierce, Leland, Warhawk. I'd love to see all of them enter the fray of Marvel Snap. Right now, it's just White Queen, Magneto, and a few other ones that have been in and out. But like the Hellfire Club specifically, you mentioned, is that something you'd want to do, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm also a huge X-Men fan. Have read tons of comics and arcs. Like, I'm really into a lot of the Hickman stuff. Hope Summers is also a really character I'm really excited by. But yeah, like there's so much to do in the X-Men that I anticipate us doing. Probably two X-Men seasons a year minimum for the rest of the time. That seems like a pretty easy bar for us to clear. That seems more likely than unlikely.
There's so much X-Men stuff that you can hit. Like, I know Weapon X is potentially one area you can hit, and like a couple others. But like, we're excited to see what's coming down the line. We're also excited for what Loki eventually is, because that's probably like one of the biggest questions from the fan base right now is what form will Loki eventually take. But
all characters swap sides no matter where they are. That's something.
We're almost 9 months into Marvel Snap, and it has been an incredible experience so far. It's been a fun ride. It continues to be a fun ride, and we are excited to see what comes next. So, Ken, Eric, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was super fun to chat with you guys.